Welcome to Fork in the Road. My name is Rusty Gaylord, and I am happy to have you with us today. Fork in the Road is a conversation about the decisions we make in life. And I love bringing on interesting people who've made interesting decisions and bold decisions in their life. Some of those things they did intentionally, deliberately, affirmative decisions they made. Other people had responded to things in their life and had to make decisions as a result of what changed in their life. I'm super interested to explore those and see how do you connect the dots and how did those things lead you to where you are today. Today, I've got Kevin Wilson with me. Kevin and I worked together at Apple. He was climbing the corporate ladder, first at BlackBerry when it was in its heyday, then he came to Apple, and we worked together there. And about almost 4 years ago, he left Apple. He decided to cash out and move to a small island outside of Vancouver, and he's from Canada, so moving back close to home. And we're going to talk to him about that decision to leave the corporate world and what it's like on the other side. So super happy to have Kevin with me here today. Kevin, welcome.
Hey, Rusty. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So Kevin, tell us a little bit about how you came, like the FIRE movement, right? Financial independence, retire early. Like, how did you get onto that? And how did you decide that that was for you? Because that's a pretty bold decision for a young man to check out of work and say, I'm going to go do something different with my life.
Yeah. And I can't tell you exactly what it was that started it. It was probably maybe 2014, 2015. I think it was just starting to get to be a culmination of the work was just becoming tougher and less fun for me. It got to a point where I was, my boss went on a medical leave for a few months, and I took over for her, and that was a very high stress demanding job. And I felt like I was walking around the office staring at my feet a lot, and I ended up with a shoulder that I couldn't move. I couldn't reach above my head. And I started to say, this job is really starting to actually kill me. I feel like I'm really starting to suffer in my early 40s. And I'm not sure if that was the moment or somewhere around there where I started reading internet blogs. Thomas Piketty's Capital in the 21st Century came out sometime around there and started to kind of highlight the income disparity, which is part of living in Silicon Valley, is understanding the income disparity that has happened in the Western world over the past 100 years. And all of this kind of led me down like the usual path. Mr. Money Mustache was a big influence when I was going down this path. He's a internet blogger, again, a Canadian who joined the tech workforce and retired in his early 30s to Colorado and is kind of living his life there and is a very successful blogger. But somewhere along the path, I just kind of got clued into, hey, if I don't want to do this forever, then what's the alternative? And I've always kind of said the odd thing about Silicon Valley is they pay you well, but they actually pay you enough to quit if you've got a escape hatch. And my escape hatch was always that I didn't really need to save for future healthcare the way that Americans need to save for future healthcare because I could move back to Canada. So that was a bit of an easier path for me, having that kind of safety net, because I know that's on the minds of a lot of people in the US when they're thinking about retiring, because you really got no idea of what that future medical bill is going to be. And that's a deal breaker for a lot of people in that position.
But so I get that piece, right? There's the constraints, there's the ability to get past those things. But even when you get past the external constraints and the financial considerations and all of that, there's the internal constraint of like, can I do that? And what am I going to do with myself if I'm not working? And like, because many of us are just raised to expect you work. That's what you do. That's what adults do. That's what responsible people do. So how did you get through that?
I'm not sure that I did. I think I was always a little bit embarrassed to tell people I was retiring. I think I was 44 on my, I actually structured I think I made my last day before I turned 45 to make sure I could actually say, okay, I quit before I hit 45. But I always felt a little bit sheepish about saying I was retiring because in my mind, it was always that I was going to figure it out as I went along and take some time off. So I didn't really call it a sabbatical, but that's effectively what it was in my mind. It was, I don't know how this is going to play out, but to some extent, I can always get another job. This isn't the last thing that I'm going to do with the rest of my life. we'll see what happens. And
Mm.
so I kind of took it that way. But again, big scary move for sure. You leave a tech job, you leave a lot of money on the table all the time. You take a big risk. Moved, like, packed up the house that we loved in San Jose, California. Moved with my wife and two dogs and a cat up to this tiny island off the coast of British Columbia where we've never lived before. But it was just kind of sometimes you just have to look at things as an adventure and say, I don't know what's going to happen next, but I need to make a change. And that was my overriding factor.
Mm. Yeah, I'm wondering, because when I talk to people in that situation, part of it is I need to make a change, but then there's another part that often plays in, which is this: I'm going to land on my feet one way or the other. I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but it's going to be okay. And you alluded to that earlier, which is I've got options, right? Whether I work or don't work, or I don't need the healthcare, so that part is taken care of. That makes it a little easier. But you knew that this wasn't the end all be all decision. This wasn't like, I'm going to live out the rest of my days this way. This was just the next step. And I'm wondering if that was part of your thinking at the time.
Yeah. And to some extent, for sure. I think, like, this is definitely a different decision if you've got kids, if you're trying to get them through school, if you're trying to support them in university. So I don't have kids, so it wasn't necessarily the same constraint from that standpoint. So I didn't go into it with a lot of fear. So that's not necessarily typical, but that was just my circumstance at the time, where I wasn't really afraid of what came next. And really, it was more about, like, I'll be honest, at that point in time, it was probably more about running away from what I was doing at the time than running towards something, which probably wasn't necessarily the right motivation, but we're all pushed and pulled in different directions for different reasons. It's never a 100% you're going towards something. You're always kind of knowing that you're leaving something behind as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think running away from stuff is a powerful force, right? It's when things get uncomfortable enough. I mean, you described that moment of walking around the office, looking down at your feet, can't raise your arm above your shoulder. I mean, yeah, for sure. Like, escape and moving away from something that is not pleasant, that you don't like, that's a powerful motivator. So I want to switch gears a little bit, because I know that it looks like you're sitting in an office right now. And I know you've decided to do some work again, re-enter the workforce. And I'm curious about that decision and how you decided it was the right thing. And did you go about it in a different way, given the position you were in, right? Because you had taken this sabbatical, you had taken the time off. Did that shift the way you thought about work?
Yeah. So to start off, I think I've just kind of come to the realization recently, the way I would describe myself is effectively I failed at FIRE. I failed at early retirement, and it wasn't the money that was the issue. It was the inherent life satisfaction. The first year that we moved up here was a whirlwind of kind of, we moved into a new house and a new place. There's lots of interesting things to do. There's lots of trips off island to the Home Depot to get supplies for the house. Like, there's a lot to do in that first 6, 8, 12 months. And that kind of kept the kind of angst at bay. And during that time as well, I got into a lot of volunteer activities. That was always one of my intentions, was try a bunch of volunteer stuff, see what sticks. And so I joined the search and rescue team here. I joined the hospital foundation board. I joined a water commission. I was volunteering on committees at our golf course. And I started dabbling into doing a bit of small business and startup consulting. So I was kind of helping a couple of small businesses that I knew with their financial plans. And all of that was good to a point. And somewhere in the kind of 12 to 15 months, and the pandemic started to hit there as well, it just got to the point where I was like, okay, I can't read the internet for 4 hours every morning. And I've probably never been super self-motivated. And this was one of those things that I probably should have known a bit more about myself, is if you're not self-motivated going into early retirement, you've got to have a real concrete structure about what you're going to do. So after doing the volunteer work, and volunteer work is great in a lot of ways, but doesn't check the boxes for me the same way that work did. Didn't really give me a sense of satisfaction and productivity. Because a lot of times, like some of these board positions that you're on for charities, it's more of an oversight role than an operations role, which doesn't give you the same sense of really doing something on a day-to-day basis. Doesn't give you the routine. You go to a meeting once every month, or maybe at most once every week. That doesn't really give you the structure and the routine. So somewhere in that time frame, I started to get a little bit more, I wouldn't say ambitious. I looked into doing some teaching. The pandemic kind of shut that down at the local colleges and universities. And then honestly, there's one day where a posting came up for a startup in Vancouver that was looking for somebody to head their financial planning department. And to your point, did I approach it differently? Yeah, I approached it differently because I sent them a note saying, I'll do it, but I'm not doing it full time, and I'm doing it remotely. So yep. To your question, I kind of started with I'm doing this on my terms, and I'm only doing this really because I want it to be enjoyable, which is a totally different mindset from my normal job where you feel like you have to have a job. This was, I'm doing it because I want to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, part of your experience in retirement reminds me of part of my own journey through this same thing, which was when I was working at Apple. I also wanted more freedom and more time to do what it is I wanted to do. And I was talking to someone about that, and I was saying, man, it would be great to retire, to quit, to just have that freedom. And the analogy that this person shared with me, which I thought was so good, it was like flying a kite. Like right now, there's a lot of tension in the string. And so all you want to do is just like, I want to get the tension out because I want to get away from all of this stress and tension and things I don't like. And I want to fly free. But a kite doesn't fly without some tension. That's what I hear you describing is like you let all the tension out. And when you do that with a kite, it eventually falls back to the ground. It doesn't stay in the air. So it's about finding that. And same if you hold the string too tightly, right? It doesn't really fly. In order for the kite to fly, you've got to have the right amount of tension.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm hearing you finding your way there.
Yeah. And it's a pretty hard balance all the time, I think, to maintain that. And you and I have talked about this from the context of like what comes next. What's the rest of your life look like? Is it always going to be in this kind of, do you always need this kind of state of tension? And you do the research on what happiness studies look like, and you take the courses on happiness. You do everything else when you're kind of struggling with that angst. And one of the things you learn is that one of the things I'm hoping I've learned, and hoping is true to some extent, is that at some point in your late 40s, early 50s, that ambition may or may not start to crest, and you start to become comfortable with doing less and not necessarily being driven to achieve or be productive in the same way. So like there's a part of me that says, hey, I'd be content working the rest of my life. But at the same time, I need to find the balance of making sure I spend time on myself, spend time with my wife, to make sure that I'm not neglecting other things that are important to me, the way that you kind of get into when you're working 60, 70 hours a week in the Silicon Valley. It's very easy to get sucked into that mindset where you can't do anything else. So I don't know how to necessarily balance the tension over the next 10 years of my life, but right now I feel like I can balance the tension.
Well, I think there's something in that, right? Because you went from one extreme, if you will, of very into work in a stressful, high stress job. Then you went to the other extreme of very little structure, right? Only the structure that you create for yourself, and some volunteer opportunities and so on, but very self-motivated. And now you're finding a middle ground of work that you can do, but doing it on your terms, doing it in a way that feels right and good to you, right? I'm going to work remotely. I'm not going to be working full time. I'm going to be contributing. You have a lot to contribute and add value, but doing it in your way.
Yeah. And I think the big question there is, could I have done this without kind of burning my old life to the ground?
Yes. Great question. And what is the answer?
I don't know. I'll tell you, if you put me back there in early 2018, and you and I have talked about this as well, I probably would have tried a little bit harder to make it last a little bit longer. And what I mean by that is get out of a job, either change jobs within the company I was at, so I'm not necessarily in the center of the pressure cooker, or maybe just kind of dial back your own expectations about what you can do, and what you need to do. Find a way of just trying to make it work. Like, can you have a job like that in a company like that and dial yourself back to the point where maybe you don't necessarily care as much, or you still care, but you're not going to take on as much personally as what you would do historically. So did I need to change the job, or could I have just changed my mindset to it? I don't know.
Hmm.
Part of me says I needed those 2 years off, and that was the only way I could ever have that mindset is by taking the 2 years off.
Yeah. Well, one of the things we were chatting about just before we went live here was this idea of what's normal. And I think part of the we all want to be normal to some extent, right? Like, just as a kid, the kids who got teased and were made fun of were the ones who didn't fit the normal mold. So there is this very, it's a very human thing. You want to be part of the community. You want to be accepted, which is just, again, it's human. And so when you're working at a company, and you're working in an environment. So I would say Silicon Valley is just not a company, but it's the whole environment of living here. And a lot of companies have this. It's the normal thing is to be motivated, to strive, to do more, to give your best, to grow. There's even some rewards around, how hard you're working. That's celebrated. It's, oh my gosh, I'm working so hard. So it can be difficult to be abnormal in that kind of situation. So all those things you just described about, do I have to change my job, or could I really just change me, change the way I approach my job, change my mindset? It's kind of like swimming upstream, because the current is taking you down this path of what's normal, what's everyone else doing, and how do you find your own path when you're in the midst of that?
Yeah, and I'd seen this in basically every company that I worked for. Every major company I worked for. It wasn't necessarily unique to Apple, but you get into this mindset of I'm busy, and you ask somebody how they are, and the first answer is I'm busy, and it's like everybody's just busy, and you've got to have papers under your arm and walking fast from meeting to meeting, and that's what your life is. And one of the things that I've learned, and again, I'm not sure whether this is all just kind of having a different perspective or whether it's inherently true or not, but one of the challenges of working at a large company is that, and I'm stealing some of these ideas from a blog post that I read a while ago from a guy named Ben Hunt. And he was talking about how the work and the job at big companies tend to become abstracted from each other. So the job is basically appearing that you're doing the job. Like, it's all about you're just kind of doing the function rather than actually doing the work. And like I can say in the 6 years as at Apple, where I was working very hard, working a ton of hours, felt like I was doing something, but honestly, would I have had did I have any meaningful impact on the behemoth that is Apple? And the answer is no. So 6 years spent there toiling away. And I can honestly say, did it matter whether my forecast was 90% good or 95% good? Probably not. And it's very easy to get abstracted and feel like what I'm doing really doesn't matter. And you get to that point here where you started this was we all have that hardwired need to be productive. And in a big company, it can start to feel like, okay, I'm doing the work, I'm busy, but you're not actually getting the inherent satisfaction of productivity because you can't see the results of what you're doing.
Yeah. So here's my question for you. Knowing what you know now, the way you're operating now, do you think you could have brought that mindset? If you could wave a magic wand and drop back into that environment that you were in, let's say Apple, but it doesn't have to be Apple. It could be any big company where everyone's got this busy mindset, but you're now different, right? You're operating in a different way. Do you think you could drop into that kind of environment and be effective?
Yeah. And honestly, to some extent, I'm kidding myself to think I'm necessarily that much different from what I used to be. So I don't necessarily know that I can answer that because I still, like, even at the small company I'm at now, I still have, like, you still have this inherent feeling about what hard work is and who's working hard and who's not working hard. And you're always kind of applying that lens to how people work and how they approach their work. Could I be a different person at Apple? I often think of the movie Office Space and just kind of that you need that kind of hypnosis mind shift of not caring. And if you find the right mindset, could you still do it at a different gear? I like to think so. People do it. Could I do it? Not guaranteed.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, we could have this conversation for a long time. I so appreciate exploring this with you. If you're open to it, if people were curious about your experience and what you've done and kind of your, going from being in the thick of things in Silicon Valley to going to the other end of sitting on the sidelines for a little while and then coming back in a different way. Are you open to people connecting with you and reaching out?
Sure.
Okay. Best way to find you, is that on LinkedIn?
Yep.
Okay. Great.
Wisdom is limited.
Yeah. Well, it is for all of us, but all of us like to find someone who's had some new experiences and done something that we haven't, because they can help guide us on the next step. So
yeah, and honestly, you've got great perspective on all of this, Rusty. So people are going to be better served in a lot of ways by talking to you and reaching out to you, because you've lived this to some extent, and I think you've got the kind of the broader perspective. My perspective is I got out and then I got back in, for what it's worth.
Well,
the company again.
You simplify it, but for those of us who've watched the journey, it's inspiring to see you navigating and growing and shifting your mindset, which is, I think, what a lot of this is about and what we've been talking about. So Kevin, thank you so much for being here and being part of Fork in the Road. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Rusty.